Cheers fellas and welcome to the first Arma at War devblog. Usually I'm doing these videos in German, but a lot of you guys asked for English versions, so now you have to stand my awful German accent, I'm sorry. With that said, I know there is a lot of confusion about Project Reality Arma 3 and why did a lot of the development team members, including me, left the project and found their own project, Arma at War. So basically I want to use this opportunity to give you folks a brief overview about Arma at War and why we left Project Reality Arma 3. Alright, let's start with why we founded our own project. Long story short, the development of Project Reality Arma 3 was initiated by Blue Drake and his DRK community in 2015. I joined the project as a developer in Q4 2015, while the other guys you might know from the development team, or the majority, joined in the beginning of 2016. By that time, there was already a DRK PI3 prototype that was tested by the community and had a great feedback. So basically, we were ready to start off and we all wanted to start the development really hard. And that was actually what we did. We started. I mean, we had everything we needed. We had the game design concept, we had a lot of feedback from the community, which was really great, and we had the technical know-how. This technical know-how was brought to us by the newly joined developers who formerly worked for CBA, ACE or other modifications you might know if you are familiar with Arma 3 and its modifications. Besides their know-how, they also brought a baseline for a powerful code framework which we used to start off with the development. And I really think that was the biggest mistake we could make. In my opinion, what we had to do at this very specific moment was to clarify who has which responsibility, which authority and which right in the project. Also, we should have clarified the relations in the project. During the whole time, the most of the developers had the feeling they're working with DRK, while DRK had the feeling that the developers are working for DRK. You see that each side has a very different understanding for the project, so that was the cause for many differences we had during the development. And by differences I don't mean that we were insulting each other or screaming at each other, but we had a lot of discussions. Don't get me wrong, discussions are not bad for development. In fact, we had a lot of discussions about game design, the code or the framework in the beginning. But afterwards we had a lot of discussions about responsibilities, authority or who's in charge of media assets. So I personally spent a lot of time with negotiating with DRK or with our own development team, and I tried to bring each side together. During that time, while I was doing this, I had the problem that I couldn't specify why we had all these differences. When I finally understood what was our actual problem, it was in the late 2016. But by that time, we already have had so many differences that we decided that it would be best to separate the development team from the actual Project Reality Arma 3 project and DRK. This decision we made together with DRK, so the actual split was very peacefully, and that's it. That's the reason why we left. One last thing I want to say about this is that I've read we have tried to hack the DRK repositories and try to inflict major damage to Project Reality Arma 3 or other DRK projects. I personally want to reject these accusations as we never tried to hurt DRK or inflict damage to their projects. I know we had our differences, but you have to see we spent a lot of time on developing Project Reality Arma 3 and we still want to see that project fly even without us. So finally we are on a neutral level now and we want to wish Project Reality Arma 3 and DRK the very best, and we hope that the project will be a major success. Alright, enough about these old boring stories and let's talk about Arma at War. When we had the split with DRK and Project Reality Arma 3 around Christmas, we happily agreed on giving away the name Project Reality Arma 3. Don't get me wrong here, I love the Project Reality community and I love Project Reality itself. But back in 2015 I thought that the name Project Reality would imply a certain gameplay. So I had the idea that people were reading Project Reality Arma 3 and they would exactly know what this mod or this game mode would be about. About a platoon-size scale, teamplay-orientated, tactical and competitive PvP experience. But we had to learn that that wouldn't happen. In fact, people were asking stuff like this. Oh, how is this making Arma 3 more realistic? They don't even have the features Ace have. Oh, that's just another Capture the Island game mode. That's not realistic, man. Or without RHS, that's not realistic. Realistic, and that that was the major problem we had. You see, people were not getting it. They were getting the wrong idea about our gameplay, and all of that because we used a name that implies more realism. I had to accept that most people playing Arma 3 never played Project Reality Battlefield 2 and most likely never have heard about it. The second problem we had with the name was that we haven't had the freedom we would like to have when it came to game design. Project Reality Battlefield 2 was always a reference in its good and in its bad parts. I mean, Project Reality Battlefield 2 is a good example to influence your project, but there are other examples like Squad or Insurgency who are tactical shooters, and we would like to use them as well as an input. Furthermore, we had own ideas for the general gameplay mechanics or the gameplay design, and we really would like to let these ideas influence the actual game design. And don't get me wrong here, there was nobody saying stuff like, oh, you can't do that because it's Project Reality Arma 3 and you have to do it in the same way that it has been done in Project Reality Battlefield 2. In fact, Blue Drag was saying the whole time that we are not making a Project Reality clone, we just want to recreate the gameplay experience and not the exact game. But of course, if you have the name Project Reality Arma 3 and you're making game designs, the knowledge that you're making a spiritual successor for a certain game, it restricts you in some way, in the way you're thinking, and simply changing the name made a huge difference in our gameplay design process. It sounds stupid, it might is, but that's the way it is. So we chose a new, more generic name for our modification or our game mode, and we think that we can reach more people with it because they don't get irritated by the name Project Reality, and it gives us more freedom, especially in our design processes or in our way to think about a project. And I can see the question marks in your eyes right now, and you're asking yourself, now we have Project Reality Arma 3 and we have Arma and War. What is the difference? What are these guys actually doing now? Alright, we want to create a PvP game mode that is team play focused, competitive and tactical. This game mode should include a certain amount of realism and immersion, but in the same time it should be easy to learn and accessible for new players. So accessibility is more important than realism in our point of view. In addition, we are distributing Arma at War as a framework. That means that players or communities can change the game mode so it fits their individual needs. They can use the vehicles, the islands and the weaponry they want. We will give them the opportunity to change a lot of configuration in the game mode without changing the core gameplay mechanics or the core gameplay experience. So the features of Arma at War, you could say, are team play on a large scale, competitive character and customization. But Project Reality Arma 3 has a lot of that, of course, because a lot of our ideas went into Project Reality Arma 3. So what is the difference between Arma at War and Project Reality Arma 3 at this very specific moment? To be honest, right now the difference is not very big because we just split it, and of course there was not that huge progress. But I'm very sure you will see the differences in a short time, especially when it comes to UI, user experience and gameplay design. But that brings us to the point where I'm talking about what we have done during the last weeks. First of all, using a new name caused a lot of work for us. We had to recreate all our media assets, including logos, backgrounds, signatures, the stuff you can see in-game, and so on. You can tell that costs a lot of time, especially if you are recreating everything from scratch. Furthermore, we all lost our important PR assets, including Discord with about 1,000 members and Twitter with, I don't remember, 600, 700 followers. I don't know. So afterwards we had to work on building up that again. Also, we struggled in picking up our processes again after we had the split. So after a short break around Christmas, we started to talk about our development processes again and tried to find better solutions for certain problems we had by the time. One of these problems was that when a developer started to program a new feature, he often had the problem that he didn't exactly know what he had to do. That was not because we never talked about it, but he was missing documentation for the task and he couldn't remember everything we talked about. I early started with creating game design documents, but they used to get lost in our project management tool. We are using ZenHub and that's not very optimized for storing documents. I mean, we could also store our documents in let's say the wiki for the GitHub, or we could store it even in the repository, but sometimes you don't want to share your internal design documents with the public, even if we are doing an open source project. So we created our own private wiki for our design documents, for our general documentation from the code or other stuff. Yeah, and that really speed up and improved that process. Sometimes fixing things is very simple. So after a lot of talking and discussions and reiterating things, we were finally ready to start off with development again. We started slow with the first iterations and created some bug fixes, improved our features, made the code more stable, and finally on 4th of February we had our first Arma at War playtest. The playtest went really good and we had a lot of good feedback. Now we are starting on making progress on new features, especially on the UI side, but we are also working on some new features, for example Mortars with its own UI and gameplay mechanics. Good, and that's everything we have done since then, and now it's time to talk about what you can expect in the nearest future. First of all, we will re-release our website on, I guess, until the end of February, including our forums. Of course, you can join our Discord first, and I will put the link into the description. Furthermore, and that's important, you can join our playtest. I will put the playtest date also in the description. It will be in February as well. Also, the first 24/7 EU and US servers are in the pipeline and will arrive shortly. So follow us on Twitter, join us on Discord, all links in the description. Have a nice day, give us a heads up, and goodbye.